I had known Bernie Madoff from the sidelines for 25 years at least. As the markets were undergoing these dramatic changes as they moved towards electronic trading platforms in the early to mid-90s, Madoff was a very important figure in that evolution. People will tell you that his firm was one of the 5 firms that combined to form what we now know as the NASDAQ. He was a pioneer in electronic stock trading. And had this not happened, he would have been not a bit player, but more than a cameo player in financial history because of his far-sighted, visionary understanding of where stock trading was going as the world electronified and communications became easier. So he saw that trading was moving from guys yelling at each other on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange to guys yelling at each other over the telephone to guys reading screens and yelling on the telephone to guys doing keystrokes on the screens to computers actually matching up the trades without any human intervention. He saw that from far away. So to my mind, he was an important, he was a guide, he was a guru of market changes at a time when they were changing at a breathtaking pace. And I enjoyed covering that process and covered any number of panels, any number of conferences, did a number of stories in which Bernie spoke for the future. And when I saw the headline move across the wires that he had been arrested on that afternoon, as you know, it was Christmas season, the newsroom was sparsely populated. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I looked at that wire story and I said, there's got to be a mistake. It was inconceivable to me. And here's one reason why. His activities as an advocate for market change had made Bernie a lot of enemies in the traditional Wall Street establishment. Every trade he took away from the New York Stock Exchange took money out of other people's pockets. So I had assumed that he would comport himself like Caesar's wife. He would be above reproach. He would not give anybody any tiny little hook that they could use to undermine his credibility in this important debate about market structure. I was stunned to see that he had been arrested. And then as the story began to unfold, and I heard what we thought there were grandiose estimates of a $50 billion Ponzi scheme, I didn't think it was plausible. Now I do. If you think of $50 billion in terms of wealth that people thought they had, rather than money he actually brought in the door. It was paper wealth, but still, it was wealth people thought they had that now they feel they've lost. So I got into the story on that first headline and raced around, gathered the important documents for that night. And the name didn't mean a lot to the other younger people in the newsroom, but a quick check of our archives showed how important it was. And I've been on the story ever since then. I think about it as the first global Ponzi scheme. There have been Ponzi schemes forever, and there were Ponzi schemes even before Charles Ponzi gave his name to Ponzi schemes. But they tended to be local. They were built on trust, local word of mouth, local buzz that would get people excited about a particular investment scam. And it was very unusual for a Ponzi scheme to reach beyond earshot of the Ponzi schemer himself. Madoff was able to raise money from Palm Beach to the Persian Gulf. It was utterly breathtaking how far the money came to invest with Bernie Madoff. And that says some important things about the way the world works now. But I think it also suggests that it might not take as long as we fear to figure out what the global ramifications are. The world isn't as big as it used to be. And that's one reason he was able to raise so much money from around the world so quickly, but I think it's also one reason that we're going to be able to figure out what happened more quickly as well. Regulators are more knitted together, investigators are going to work better. The paper trail now stretches around the world in the way it didn't even 10 years ago. There's been a lot of soul searching about what journalists could have and should have seen and reported beforehand. There's been even more, and I think more telling, soul searching about what regulators should have and could have done beforehand. This is the kind of story that reminds journalists of their limitations. We don't have subpoenas, we don't have handcuffs, we don't have wiretaps. So there's a limit to how much we can learn. There were a few stories that ran 6, 8, 10 years ago about how mysterious Madoff's investment claims were. He was always very quiet about his money management business. All most journalists knew about Bernie Madoff was that he ran one of the biggest wholesale stock trading businesses on Wall Street, and what was important. And so far as we know, that business was legitimate. That business withstood regulatory examination. Nobody on the street ever heard any bad gossip about Bernie's stock trading. But we never heard anything about Bernie's money management. And the few pieces that were run never actually pulled the trigger, never actually had the evidence. There were a few whistleblowers who went to the regulators with their evidence. In one case, they went to a major publication, the Wall Street Journal. But that particular whistleblower was unwilling at that point to go public. And as you know, journalists are kind of restricted about what use they can make of pejorative anonymous sources. You certainly could never have gone on the air or in print and said, I've got this really smart source who thinks Bernie Madoff is running a Ponzi scheme, if you couldn't prove it. So I don't give us a complete pass. I think we should have been much more skeptical. And once we learned he was running money, that he was managing money, we should have been much more alert to the scale of money he was running. In recent years, he reported to the SEC that he had about $17 billion under management. Well, that would have made him one of the 10 largest hedge funds in the country. But that's not saying much, because the span between the biggest and him was very large. But still, it should have drawn attention. We should have paid more attention. That's not to say we could have gotten any more out of him without subpoenas, without wiretaps. But we should have questioned him more assiduously. I think that is one of the weaknesses that journalists fall prey to. We get issue fatigue. We don't stick with it. We don't follow up often enough. And to that extent, I think we could have done more on Madoff. But there were aspects to this scandal that I think are now going to come out that could only have been uncovered by a regulatory or a law enforcement investigator. And we have to understand that we do have those limitations. Skepticism, skepticism, skepticism. One of the things that made Bernie so successful was that he had an enormous reputation and trust among the people with whom he dealt. And journalists need to keep at front of mind the idea that those are the most powerful people. People who inspire trust in other people, enormous amounts of trust in other people, are very powerful people. And it's one of the basic rules of journalism: watch the powerful. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So that's lesson number one. Identify all the various kinds of power people have in the marketplace. It's not always money. It's not always evident. It can come in the currency of trust and reputation and influence. And we need to watch the people who spend that kind of currency just as closely as we watch the Bill Gateses and the Warren Buffetts who spend the kind of currency that we spend at the grocery store every day. So maintain skepticism, watch the powerful very carefully, and as I said, don't tire of a story. If it still seems important to you, if there's a mystery that you still can't get your mind around, don't tire of it. Stay the course. So many important financial stories over the years have fallen between the cracks because journalists have not been able to connect the dots, to connect local stories into bigger national trends, whether it was local stories about failing S&Ls or local stories about Madoff investors. These were dots that could have been connected more easily. The internet makes this easier for us, ironically. Any story can become a national story through the internet. Any reporting can be done internationally with the internet. It's as easy to email a potential source in India as it is to telephone a potential source in Indianapolis. So why would you not use those tools to pursue these stories? And certainly I wish that we had done that more assiduously with Madoff, understanding our limitations. I think the lessons that we should take from this is that trust is a form of power that needs to be watched. As finances go global, fraud goes global. And we need to make sure our reporting skills go global as well, and that we don't tire and we stay the course. Well, one important thing that any local reporter has to be sure they know is the context. You've got to be sure that you understand what regional, national, and international context these local activities represent. If you see an expansion of a particular kind of industry in your area, you ought to be asking the regional, national, and international questions about why here, why now? How are they actually making money? So that as you're covering local events and local players, you always have a sense of where they fit into the big picture, into the big playbill here. You know what role they and their company are playing. And this goes beyond just knowing that this company is a subsidiary of that great big company, which is a subsidiary of that European holding company. You need to know that, of course, and you need to know the paper trail that will educate you about those linkages. But you also need to know how what is happening locally fits into what you hear or read about is happening nationally, internationally. And if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't make sense, that ought to be the alarm bell. That's 14 red flags pointing at that topic. If people say they're making money locally, doing something that nobody else in the country or in the world has been able to make money doing, well, the likelihood is that this is not the one-time example that proves the rule. The likelihood is that there's some problem with that local example. Unless you know the broader picture, you can't measure that local activity against the credibility yardstick. Does this make sense? Locally also, I think reporters too often do not insist on clarity from local experts, from local business leaders, from local economic leaders. They do not come to the press conference or to the interview saying, I'm at least as smart as most of my readers. If I can't understand you, it's not my problem. You need to make yourself clear to me so I can make what you're doing clear to my readers. We've swallowed way too much gobbledygook at the national and local level, and we need to draw a line at that. If people had pressed Bernie Madoff to explain what he was doing, clearly, publicly, repeatedly, somebody would have twigged that this wasn't plausible, this wasn't logical, and it would have gotten more attention. So at the local level, you have to insist on clarity. If you don't get it, you should be suspicious. You need to insist on consistency, so that if you see something happening locally that isn't consistent with national or international trends, you make sure you understand why this is different. And I think those two skills will make you a lot smarter about what you do on the local level.